Hello, I'm Megan Searing-Young. I'm the director of the Greenbelt Museum here in Greenbelt, Maryland. The Greenbelt Museum was begun in 1987 when the community turned 50 years old, and since that time we've been preserving and celebrating Greenbelt's history. I'm here today to talk about several women who were very important in terms of Greenbelt's history. The first woman I'd like to talk about is a woman named Catherine Bauer. She considered herself a quote-unquote houser, and by that she meant that she was someone who was passionately devoted to making sure that there was adequate housing for people of low income. She believed that this was a basic right and incredibly important in terms of their lives. She had studied at Vassar and ended up going to Europe when she was a young woman. She lived in Paris and was particularly influenced by many of the public housing projects that were being built there following World War I. She came back to the US and embarked upon a long career that all involved public housing and housing reform. She was considered an expert in her field. She published a book called Modern Housing in 1934, which is still considered a classic today. And she was one of the few women that was involved in Greenbelt's planning. She was also involved in the creation of the film The City that was made by the American Planning Association.
Science takes flight at last for human goals. This new age builds a better kind of city, close to the soil once more, as molded to our human wants as planes are shaped for speed. New cities take form, green cities. They're built into the countryside. They're ringed with trees and fields and gardens.
We have a lot more research to do to figure out exactly what parts of Greenbelt she influenced, but her ideas in terms of planning for housing and the importance of public housing certainly had a role to play. We really can't talk about Greenbelt history and the influence of women without talking about Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt was very interested in Greenbelt from its beginning, and she had actually been involved in another New Deal era housing development called Arthurdale in West Virginia. And many historians believe that Greenbelt is sort of a more robust version of Arthurdale, that they learned from some of the problems that they had there in terms of how important building not just homes and school, but also having a complete package to offer people in terms of green space and recreational activities and things like that. She visited Greenbelt 3 times, once before it was open as it was being built, and then once again when the residents were first there in October 1937, and again for a war bond rally in the 40s. But aside from her physically coming to visit, which were important occasions, she was very intent on keeping up with the various plans and how Greenbelt was coming along. In fact, at one point, as Greenbelt was nearing completion, the government decided that many of the recreational facilities, such as the ball fields, playgrounds, things like that, were going to be cut due to budget concerns. And someone that had worked on the project wrote her to let her know that this was happening and to ask for her help. And she read that note and immediately went to Franklin Delano Roosevelt to ask him to please look into this and make sure that Greenbelt would be built to its original specifications. And that is in fact what happened. So she, in a large way, helped to save parts of the Greenbelt plan that have become very important. Eleanor Roosevelt is much beloved here in Greenbelt, and in fact, when the county school board was building a brand new high school here in Greenbelt and planned to name it after Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the citizens objected and successfully petitioned to have the name changed to honor Eleanor Roosevelt, and that's why we have Eleanor Roosevelt High School. Another woman very important in Greenbelt's history is, of course, Lenore Thomas Straus. Lenore Thomas Straus was a young woman when she was commissioned by the Resettlement Administration to provide the public art that would complement Greenbelt's plan. She decided that she would do the preamble to the Constitution on the front of the school building, which would also serve as a community building in the evenings. She felt that American children didn't know enough about their history, and so she wanted to include elements of the preamble on the physical building. As a young woman, she'd been very interested in how to combine art with architecture. And so this opportunity fits perfectly with her interests. One of the bas-relief panels that she worked on was to illustrate the phrase "established justice." And in this instance, she did a clay mock-up, as she did for all of them, that she then submitted to her supervisors at the Resettlement Administration within the Special Skills Division. And the first version that she came up with, that a man being lynched. He's hanging from a scaffolding. There's a man with a shotgun in front of him in one side of the frame, and the rest of the scene is of a judge and jury turning their backs on the proceeding. And the fact that she submitted this, as a young woman in deeply segregated Prince George's County, was a pretty bold move. It was rejected. It was one of her only pieces that she said was rejected, and she reworked it so that it was not quite so controversial. But the fact that this was her vision, I think really speaks to her courage and the courage of her convictions. She worked closely as she was working on the bas reliefs at the community center, now the community center, with a group of African-American laborers, and she herself took snapshots of some of them. So she was obviously seeing them. And she also would have known at that time, most likely, that Greenbelt was open to whites only. Despite how we speak of it being a utopia, it was only that if you were a white family. There were no African-American families permitted to reside in Greenbelt. Other things that she did of importance were the mother and child statue that kind of anchors the center of town. Early townspeople didn't seem to love it, but I think over time it's become more respected, and now many, many people do think that it's a sort of symbol, or a visual symbol of Greenbelt.